Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to make our own custom windows so that we can get this all these windows kind of resolved and get the look we're after. And you'll notice I got this arch top here. We're going to build an arch top window in here. We'll probably match it up here for this one as well. So that way we can get a little bit of a detail there. That way there's not quite so much space there. We've got the vaulted ceiling inside, so we've got enough space for it there. And same up here, so might as well give a little bit of extra light there when we can. Okay, so to create our own custom window, we're going to come up here to File, New, Family, and then I'm going to scroll down here to Window and open this family up. So basically what it starts out with is a generic window family with basically no window in it. So it's basically a wall with a hole in it. It gives you some default parameters. It's got a reference plane down the middle that always is basically locked to be in the center of the window at all times. It gives you a width parameter that's already set up along with the two side reference planes here, the left and the right side. Then if you go to, say, the exterior or the interior, you can see those left and right reference planes there, the center reference plane, and then you can also see the top and bottom reference planes that they've got set up here for you to work within. There's also a height parameter and a sill height parameter that's default set up in here. So they give you some basis of starting, and then from there it's up to you to kind of work this all out. So when you're building something in the family layer, it's you have the same tools to work with as when we were in our project and creating our own sort of trim and that sort of detail. So what we're going to do, we're not going to make this window family anything too crazy. It's not like we're going to go in and import the actual sill and frame details and all of that from a window manufacturer. We're just going to go ahead and make it so that it looks approximately correct, and then all of the window specs and that sort of stuff we can get from a manufacturer or something like that. So basically what I want is I'm just going to have almost like a picture window or a fixed window look. So I'll have a sash and frame and all of that sort of stuff. So I'm just going to make it simple and make that the exact same profile all the way around. So to do that, I'm going to go to Sweep and I'm going to hit Sketch Path. So when I sketch a path, I'm going to hit Pick Lines, and when I click a line, you'll see this lock comes into play. I'm going to lock each one of these all the way around. And basically what that's doing is it's locking the path that I'm creating here to the opening within the wall. So that way when I expand the width of this, it should expand my path as well. When I expand the height, it'll expand the height. So now I'm going to go to my floor plan view, and I can see my crosshatch here. Now this is where it gets a little bit different. So I've got my exterior side and I've got my interior side here. So I'm going to hit Edit Profile, and on the inside I want this to go ahead and match up right with the edge of the wall, because if this is the interior face of my wall, I want that to come right to the edge, so then my casing and stuff matches right up with that. It's the exterior that I don't necessarily want to match up right with the edge. I want it to sit back a little bit so that, like, maybe my stucco runs right around the edge, or I've got stone or something like that, and I need this to sit back in here. So I'm going to end up with something that's kind of like, let's say I end up with a kind of a 2-inch frame here, and I end up with something that's kind of like this. So I end up sitting off of the face of the wall. Let's see, I'll make that an inch for right now. So we'll say that's an inch, and I'm going to go ahead and make sure that these are all decent dimensions here. I don't want that to be too crazy. Okay, so now that I have this set up here, what I'm going to do is apply some dimensions to this and apply a couple parameters to this as well that I'll be able to control within my model once I bring this into my project. So first thing I'm going to do is apply a dimension from here to the exterior face of the wall. And so this wall thickness isn't always going to be the same as what's in my project. I want to be able to tell it how far off of the exterior face I want this little portion to sit. So I need to apply a parameter to this so that basically all parameters is something that you can adjust once this family is brought into a project. So obviously with the windows we already have in our project, we have a width parameter. We already got into that and set what widths we want for our windows, what heights we want for our windows, all of that sort of stuff we can apply. So we have these in the family that's already there. We do not have something like this that lets us offset the kind of inset into the wall. So I'm going to come up here, and once I've got a dimension string here, and I click on it, you can see I have this label option up here. And when I pull this down, these are all of the parameters that are already built into this family here. So I've got my width, I've got my height, my default sill height, all the stuff that we saw when we came into the model. But I want to create a new one, so I'm going to come over here and say create new parameter. And I'm going to call this wall inset. And I can put it under dimensions. I could come down and put it in any really category I want. But basically all this is going to do is what subtitle is it going to be placed within the properties of the thing. So if it's under graphics, it's going to be under the graphics tab, other, text, all of that sort of stuff. So then we have a type and we have an instance parameter over here. A type parameter is basically if I change this inset for let's say I've got for instance I've got a 24-inch by 60-inch window in my project, and in one scenario it's in a stucco wall like we have, and then another instance I have the exact same window, same dimensions and everything, but it's in a stone wall, and I want that inset to be able to change depending on whether it's in the stone wall or whether it's in the stucco wall. If I have a type parameter and I have the exact same window in a stone wall and in a stucco wall, this wall inset dimension has to stay the same unless I want to duplicate that and have basically two windows that are the same size. Only one is set up for stone, one of them is set up for stucco. Depending on what type of project you're working on, sometimes the type parameter works just fine. So that way you may have two windows the exact same size, one for stone, one for stucco, that kind of thing. It just may be easier to keep track of that way. Otherwise, you could do in a small project like we're working on, maybe I don't want that many window types in there. I'm not going to have a ton of window types anyway, but maybe I don't want to have to duplicate it and create a stone one and a stucco one and all that sort of thing. So I could make it an instance parameter. And basically an instance parameter is that individual window. So even if I have 60 of these 24 by 60 inch windows, I could change the wall inset for each individual one without it impacting the other ones. So a good example of this is the sill height. So if I have a 24 by 60 inch window at 3 foot sill height and I change another one to a 2 foot sill height, it's not going to automatically drop both of them to a 2 foot sill height. That sill height is an instance parameter, so each individual window has its own sill height that you can plug into it. If it were a type parameter, I wouldn't be able to do that. If I changed the sill height of 1 to 2 foot, all of them would drop to 2 foot. So that's the kind of the difference between a type and an instance. I tend to, because a lot of times when I'm working in a model, I'm the only one working in the model. I don't have the issue of a whole bunch of people in a single model and people kind of messing things up and causing problems. A lot of times I'll just make everything instance parameters, because if I want to change everything about like a certain type or a 24 by 60 inch window, I want to change every wall inset for it, I'll just right click it, hit select all instances in the entire project, then change it. But I like to have that flexibility of adjusting each individual window if I want to, because you never know when it might be handy to have that kind of flexibility. So for the most part, I end up going with instances, but there are many times where type works out better if you're working in a larger practice or something like that. So I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to do an instance parameter. So I've got that set to 1 inch. So that will be adjustable. Now these, I want to make sure that this always stays on the inside here. So I'm going to make that 0 foot 0, and I'm going to hit this lock button. And that's going to say, okay, no matter what, this line within this profile has to stay on the inside face there. So now that I have that, if I hit my green check mark, and I finish that, so I have this this sort of profile here. If I go to my floor plan so I can really see what's going on, up here is the family types kind of dialog here, and if I open this up, it shows me all of the different parameters I've got built in here, and here's my 1 inch. So I want to make sure that this is working appropriately. So I'm going to say let's make it 2 inches and hit apply. So now that jumps back there. But if I make this, if you notice, this didn't move, just that moved. So if I make this, let's say 3 inches, it's probably not going to let me, because this is going to end up going the other way and it's going to cause a problem. Okay, so it got to a certain point and now it's starting to squish this. So let's say we make it 4 inches, like with our stone. Now it causes a problem. So I need to make sure that that I make this so that this entire thing is moving as I need it to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this back at 1 inch, hit apply, and actually let's just undo what we did because we want that thickness to stay there. So I'm going to hit edit sweep and come back into this profile. So I've got my 1 inch, I've got that staying there, that all works just fine. I always want this dimension to stay the same. So I'm going to put a dimension on it and I'm going to lock it. So that always has to stay the same. So when this started to pinch this, now it won't, because it says this has to be 1.5 inches. This dimension here, this 1.5 inches, maybe I always want that to stay 1.5 inches. So as this starts to push back, so does this. And the only thing that gets closer and closer is to this side. But at no point am I going to exceed that, because I'm never going to have a wall that's an exterior wall that's 5 inches or less thick. So I'm not real concerned about that portion. So I'll go ahead and lock that as well. Now if I hit my check mark and I come in here and I say, okay, I want this to be 2 inches thick, now the entire thing should shift back, and it does. So I'm okay there. That should work just fine. Yeah, if I made this 4 inches in this particular wall, I would have a problem because this wall isn't that thick. But for the most part, this should work out just fine. So I'm going to end up, let's say I've got my stucco wall. Let's see, I've got a wall of only 6 inches thick. So an exterior wall 6 inches thick, that's pretty uncommon. So I should be okay here. I should have plenty of room for this to kind of shift back and forth here. So that should work just fine. If I hit my green check mark, now that whole thing will move back and forth within the wall just how I want it to. Then I'm going to go ahead and make sure that my width and height is working. So height, if I make this 6 foot and I make this 4 foot and I hit apply, everything works, so it all expands to the where I want it to, so that's working just fine. I'll undo that, take it back to normal. Now I just need to get, basically the only thing I'm missing is my glass pane. So if I go to, say, my exterior here, create an extrusion, I'm going to set my work plane to this here, and as I did before, I'm going to go around and lock this in place to all of these. And I'm going to set this back, say, a half an inch. I'll just make it a quarter of an inch thick for that. So now I've got my glass pane in there. I want to make sure that that moves with everything else. So I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to go ahead and adjust the height and width here, hit apply, and it looks like it moved with it, so I'm good there. Undo this. Okay, so now the issue is I don't really have, actually let's set this back. That's a half an inch, that should work just fine. Yeah, I'm okay there. Okay, so now I don't have any materials applied to this. I need to be able to adjust the material once I get it into my project. So if I click on this, you can see I have materials here. I can come in and apply a material if I want, but that's being applied within the family. That might cause me a couple issues when I take it into a project. So I'm going to hit this little associate family parameter on the side here, and down here is new parameter. So you'll notice there are no material parameters already applied in this family. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to say window frame. And this I'm going to make a type parameter because all of my windows are going to be the same color for the most part. It's not very often you change window colors randomly throughout a project, so I'm going to say it's okay to make this a type parameter. So I'm going to say okay, okay. Now my glass, I'm going to apply another one. I'm going to call that glazing. Say okay, okay. So now I should be able to take this into my project and apply a material to the frame and then apply a material to the glass. Now if I want to do, so the look we're after is kind of that rustic style. I might need some mutton bars in here. The problem that I would have is if I model mutton bars in here, I'm going to end up and do sort of a divided light. I'm going to end up with an issue of, in some of my windows, maybe the height is such that I want maybe 2 horizontal divides and 1 vertical divide, or sometimes I want 3 and other times I want 2 verticals, and depending on what I'm doing, I might have an issue with how many I've got there. So I need to somehow be able to adjust how all of that works. I want to be able to tell it how many horizontals I've got, how many verticals I've got, and have it automatically figure out the general spacing of those mutton bars for me, based on the height and the width of the window. So to do that, if I just went in and created an extrusion, I'd have a hard time doing that because it doesn't necessarily know how to add to your sketch. I need something like a physical thing that I can then apply dimensions and things like that to, and have it recognize that and copy it and paste it and do all of that sort of stuff as it needs to based on numbers that I give it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do what's called a nested family, and basically what that is a family inside of another family. So I'm going to come up here and say File, New, Family, and I'm just going to make this a generic model. So I'm going to come down here and say Generic Model, Open. And basically all this is a crosshatch here. And I am going to create an extrusion. And my mutton bar will be, we'll say 3/4 of an inch thick, and we'll only make it a quarter inch thick and 3/4 of an inch wide. And I'm going to go ahead and center that on there. So I'm okay that direction, and then I'm going to center it this way as well. So that way the crosshatch goes directly through the center there. And it's a foot tall, and I'll say okay. One thing, actually, real quick, let's go back into that. We're going to want to make sure that this all stays the same. So I want this to always be 3/4 of an inch, so I'm going to lock that. I want this to always be 1/4 of an inch, so I'm going to lock that. So those dimensions are never going to change. My muntin bars are always the same size. I'm going to go ahead and put this equals on there. Basically that's telling it is the dimension from here to here and here to here is always going to be the same. And since I made this 1/4 of an inch, those are always going to be an 1/8 inch. I'm going to do the same thing for this and apply that. So now I've got that locked in place. So I'm okay there. Now if I go to the front, I want to be able to control the height of this. So the height parameter, I'm going to apply a new height parameter, and this I'll make it an instance. So I'm going to say height, say okay. Because depending on what I'm doing, I may end up with a different height for these. Okay, so that seems to work pretty well. Let's make sure that I've got this working. So let's say I've got 1.5 feet and I hit apply. So that jumps, so I'm okay there. So I'll hit okay. So I've got my height, I got everything kind of locked in place. I should be okay overall there. So I'm going to save this, save family, and I'm going to call this vertical muntin. I'm going to load this into my family. And I'm going to place this in the center here, and I'm going to move it back so that it sits, I'm going to move this so that it sits on the outside of my glass pane there. So if I go to my exterior, I've got my little muntin bar here, and I want it to sit here. Now, the issue that I have is I could make this so that I just go ahead and change what the height is to be what it is here, but every time that the window changes size, I need it to go ahead and adjust with it. So my frame thickness here is 2 3/4 inches there and 2 3/4 inches here. So I'm going to end up with basically a 5.5 inch difference from my height, from the overall height of my window to the height of my muntin. So to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this, and I'm going to go in and say new parameter, and I'll make this an instance, and I'm going to say this is muntin height. Say okay. Now if I come up here, you'll see I have a muntin height option. But what I can do is apply a formula to that, and that formula I can associate with the height of my window. So what I can do is type in here height, and it has to be the exact same spelling and everything as this other parameter, minus 5.5 inches. So you see the muntin height automatically changed to 3 foot 6.5. So that's basically 4 foot minus the 5.5 inches here. So that puts me right where I want to be. Now if I change the height of my window, let's say I make this 6 foot. Now that jumps and I should be good. If I change my, let's say I change my sill height to 2 foot, how does that help? That does not help, because if I drop this down, now it doesn't move with it. So what I need to do is come in here and hit align, and I want the bottom of the window, and if I hit tab, I can grab the very bottom of the vertical mullion, and you'll see the lock pop up, and I can lock that alignment so that it's always there. So now if I come in and change this to 2 feet, it drops with it. So now this is starting to kind of work the way that we want it to. Now I need this to, I'm going to move this off to the side here. Now I should be able to grab a center line of this. Because I placed this in the middle of my crosshatch when I created the mullion, if you'll remember the green kind of reference plane in this family, that allows me to snap to that. And then because I put the equals dimension constraint on it, it will always stay even over that line. So what I can do is I can take this and I can array it. So I'm going to hit the array tool here, and I'm going to say, okay, I want 3 of these. And we'll say, okay, I'm going to group and associate it, and I'm going to go from here to here. And we'll say, okay, we should be good there. Now, if I hit dimension, and I go from here to the center there, to the center of that one, and I hit equals. I'll hit OK. So now that I have this constraint put on there, these will always stay equal across there, there, and there. But if I adjust this, and I want this to be equal all the way across there, we'll say OK. So now I've got this setup where these are staying equal all the way across. If I go ahead and maybe I change my my value to 2, notice how that doesn't automatically move those. So what I'm going to do is actually take these two, and I'm going to say, okay, I want these, I want this, this, and this to be equal across here. And we'll say, okay. And I want to be able to grab, let's get this out of the way here. I'm going to pull this down here. So I'm going to grab this array option, and I'm going to apply a parameter to it. And I'm going to say number of muntins. And I'm going to say vertical. And we'll say OK. And I've got the vertical muntins kind of situated there. So now if I come in here, number of muntins down here is 2. If I increase that to 3, it jumps all the way over to the side here. And if I go to 4, it's going to go even further out here. So this still isn't quite working the way we want it to. So let's go ahead and let's undo this. Let's back up a minute. So we're going to delete that. Let's ungroup this and get this out of here. So if I take this and apply this across here to here, let's get this one to work for us. So that's equal. Now if I take this and array this, now I have this equal parameter applied across here. Actually, we're going to do this slightly different. Maybe that's why we're having issues. Okay. Let's move this back over. Here we go. We'll troubleshoot as we go. So if I move this over here, now I'm going to, actually let's just array this. So we'll array it again just how we did before. And we'll say 2 is good. We're okay there. We're going to add the parameter. We'll say vertical muntins. So we're good there. Now, when I apply this dimension across here, I'm going to add a parameter to this. And I'm going to call this vertical muntin spacing. And then I'm going to apply the same parameter from here to here. I'm going to drop that down, and vertical muntin spacing applied to that one too. Okay. So the spacing on this is going to be determined by the overall width of the window and the number that I have here. So if I come in here and say, okay, the vertical spacing, muntin spacing, is basically going to be a formula. And what that is going to be is our width, and let's put this in parentheses. So we're going to do our width minus 5.5 inches divided by, what did we call this? Vertical muntins. Vertical muntins. And so if I just divide by vertical muntins, I've got 2. It's going to space these wrong because I actually want 3 spaces there. So it's vertical muntins plus 1 is the spacing that I want there. So now if I hit apply, now I get a nice even spacing across there. So if I all of a sudden go to 3 muntins, how's that work? That works just fine. 4. So that's working just fine there. So now if I go down to 1, so I can't go to 1 because of my, if I have 1, I don't end up with a an actual array. So let's see. We'll see if that ends up being an issue. I think we're going to end up with probably 2 verticals in most of our windows there, but if not, we can go in and adjust a couple of things. Yeah, I think that's going to work okay. So let's go ahead and hit cancel. Okay, so we've got our vertical muntins there. That works just fine. If we adjust our width, let's say I adjust the width to 4 feet, that should go ahead and adjust everything. It does. So we're okay there. Now we just need to do our horizontals the exact same way. So I can't do my I can't use this same family because I can't rotate it horizontal. So I'm going to create a new family here, and I'll do a generic model again. And we'll make this 2 feet. This is going to be 3/4 of an inch. So this is going to be our horizontal. So this is actually going to be 3/4 of an inch tall. So we're okay there. Let's make this centered on there. 3/4 of an inch tall. We'll go to our front view. I'm going to turn that off. Move that down. So then I end up with, oops, I want this to be equal. I want this to always be 3/4. I want my width to be adjustable. So I'm going to apply a muntin width there. And then I will go ahead and lock that there. So I know this is always 1/4 of an inch thick. Now I will load it into my family. And I'm going to align with one side. So I'm good there. And I'm going to move this back so that it's even here. Now if I go to my exterior side, I want to take this and move it up into my window here. So I'm okay there. Alright, so I'm locked to the one side. I want to make my mutton width here a parameter, so mutton width. Okay. Go ahead and change my mutton width to basically a width minus 5.5 inches. Same as what we did before, so that'll jump and move as we want it to. So we're okay there. Now we need to go ahead and array this. So we will array this up and we'll say 2. Okay, for now. And apply our, okay, so it's not snapping to, so there's no middle point for me to grab a dimension to. If you'll see when I grab here and I go to the middle, there's nothing there for me to actually snap to. So I need to give myself something in the family to grab. So if I go to my front, I want to put something in here that I can go ahead and grab. So I'm going to put a model line in, but I'm actually going to make it an invisible line. You could do this with a reference plane if you want to, but I'm going to go ahead and just use an invisible line just as an easy way of going about doing this. So I'll hit OK, override, and so if I go, whoops, I need to make sure that this always stays where it is. So I'll grab those two. Whoops. Well, maybe it already will. We'll see if this works here. So I'll override that, go to the exterior. Now I should have, there's that line. So there's my invisible line that I've got here. So I can grab that, and I'll call this horizontal mutton spacing. And I want to do the same thing here. So horizontal mutton spacing, okay. Now if I come in here, you'll notice I forgot to make this an instance parameter, so I'm going to go ahead and make that way. So if you ever mix that up, you can come in here and grab it and then just hit edit and change that sort of stuff. So our horizontal mutton spacing is going to be the exact same as our vertical mutton spacing, only instead of width, we're going to do height minus 5.5 inches divided by, whoops, we didn't apply our, we've got our, gotta apply our array here. So we'll call this horizontal muttons. There we go. So now we can come in here and say this is going to be height minus 5.5 inches divided by, and we just called that horizontal muttons. So horizontal muttons plus 1. Right parentheses. Whoops. There we go. So I hit OK. Instance parameters can't be used in type parameter formulas. There we go. When I backed out, it had resorted it back to a type parameter. So there we go. We've got our spacing and everything figured out. That should all work. The only thing that might cause us problems, and if we go to our level 1 here, so there's our glass. So let's say we change our wall inset from 2 inches to 1 inch and hit apply. So you'll notice our muttons are still sitting back here. We want to make sure that our muttons stay on the glass here. So let's undo that. and I'm going to edit group, and I'm going to make it so that that is always 1/4 of an inch. And I'm going to do the same to this. Grab the edge of that so that it's always right off of the back of the glazing there. So now let's get all of these kind of out of the way here. This is getting a little obnoxious. Alright. So now if I change this to 1 inch, let's make sure. So you'll see the ones moved, the other ones didn't. I need to make sure that the other one moves with it. And for whatever reason our horizontal, oh, okay, so we have them coming on this side, but we do not have that side. So I need to go ahead and undo what we just did there and make sure that this one is also moving with it. So grab that and lock that in place. Whoops. Finish that. Okay. So now if I change this from 2 inch to 1 inch, hit apply. Now both of those are moving. Now I just need my horizontals to do the same. So let's get these out of our way here. And let's go to our kind of section here. So there's one horizontal. I'll edit this. And where's our, so this is our glass pane here. So I'll go ahead and grab the edge of that. Lock that in place. Finish that one. And we'll do the same for this one. There we go. We'll finish that. So now when I change this, this should all go ahead and move. So that moved just fine. Now if I change the number of muntins, let's say I change this to 4 horizontal, 3 vertical, and then I change my wall inset back to 2 inches, everything moves with it. So that should work just fine. Now the only thing that I haven't applied a material parameter to is our muntins here. So I need to be able to apply a material to those. So what I'm going to do is I need to go back into my, so I have my vertical muntin. I'm going to grab this and call this muntins. Say OK. Load that into my family here. And then I also need my horizontal muntin here. Muntin. Say OK. And load that in. Okay, so now if I come in and grab these, I should be able, here's my muntin, and I'm going to make it the same as the window frame. There's no reason that my muntins would really necessarily be a different option than that. So just to make sure, all of these should be the exact same. Then I'll do the same for my horizontals. window frame, okay. Oops. Edit group, edit type. Gotta grab it first. So all of that should be taken care of. So looks like our window works pretty well. So we're in good shape there. So now I can file save as, save this family as, we'll say tiny house window. And then we'll load this into our project. So now we've got our window in here. So we know that these are going to be 24 by 54s. So I'm going to go ahead and delete these three and say 24-inch by 54-inch. So by 24 inches. Okay. Oh, and it looks like we've got an issue there. We'll move this down here. Okay, so looks like let's flip the facing here. So we have some of our muntins are moving. They're straying a little bit on us. So if we go into edit family, I want to make sure that all of these are locked in place. So I want to lock that, hit finish. Looks like that's already taken care of. So now if I load into the project, hit OK, overwrite. There they go. So now they all jump back to where they should be. So now I can take this window and I can copy this over once and then copy it twice over here. So now I've got my 3 windows here. I want to be able to, my wall inset, I'm in my stucco wall, so I'll only make that 3/4 of an inch. Now I want to make sure that I've got all of this kind of taken care of. So maybe 4 might be a little much, and 3 is definitely too much. So that looks about right. That's looking much better. So we'll stick with that. Now if I come under edit type, glazing, I want this to be glass. I'm pretty sure there's a glass already in here that I can use. There's glass. So we'll say OK. And then window frame. I'm going to make my windows the same color as my exterior trim, so I'm just going to use the exact same material there. We'll say OK. And there we go. So now I've got those windows placed in there, and I can go through and actually do the same for these. I'm going to grab this. Grab those two. And I'm using this other one as just a reference point since I already centered them on here. I had the benefit of the trim on the other one, so I can pull those down. So now these two I need to flip the facing so that it's on the same side as mine, and then get rid of this one and copy this over. Okay, so now we have these in place. We want to go ahead and make sure that the inset is correct. So I'm going to grab these 3, and the wall inset I want to be, say, 3 inches. So now that sets back in there. But you can see I'm not getting the stone texture there, and the reason for that is if I go into my wall type here, wrapping at inserts, I want that to be exterior. And I could probably do the same from my ends. So now if I say OK, now I get the stone wrapping the corners there. And that looks far better than what I had before, where these actually sit way out there. You end up seeing the stone at the edges, and you get a little bit more of a shadow across the top there. I get a better look for my stucco here as well. So now I can go around and take my window that we've created and place it exactly where I want, get the inset that I want. I can see how my sills run across there. That looks a lot better there as well. I want to do the same thing here with my, with my wall type, with my stucco wall. So I'll come into my stucco wall and say, okay, I want to wrap this so that I get that stucco texture wrapping the corner here. So now that that's taken care of, that looks pretty good. Basically, the way that I'm going to do the arch tops I'm going to do it pretty much the exact same way as I did this, except because this is going to be a window that's pretty much specific to this project, I'm actually just going to model this in place. So what I'll end up doing is going to the south elevation. I'll grab that wall here. I'll grab this, edit the profile, cut a hole out of it where the window is, and then just use my model in place stuff under windows and just model this in place to look just like these with that radius and everything in there. That way I get the exact, get everything that I want in here. I'll have the radius and the height and all of that stuff will match up just fine. And I'll be able to take that same model and just copy it up here and have that same look. So for now, that should work just fine. So the next thing we'll end up doing is probably getting into the interior a little bit more. As far as little details and stuff like that out here go, anything you want to add is basically the same tools that we've already gotten into in terms of model in place stuff, walls, floors. All of that stuff are things that you can use to add little details like little flower boxes and stuff like that to make either a rendering or a drawing or something really kind of pop and look the way you want. So the next step will be moving to the interior and starting to detail out interior finishes and that sort of stuff. So that will be the next step.
Okay, so this is going to jump just a little bit from the end of that last little bit. But so once I kind of got everything in there and I started kind of clicking my windows in all over the place and started working on those arch tops, I realized that I probably do want just a single vertical. I don't want two verticals. So I need to be able to set this to have a single vertical muntin rather than have a minimum of two. Because like I mentioned before, the array tool will not allow you to do values of less than 2. So because we have this set as an array, going to a number less than 2 isn't really permissible. So we need to find a way around that. And so what I've done here, and I'll walk you through kind of what I did to resolve that. I took one of our muntins and I copied it and then pulled it out of that array. So it's a standalone muntin all by itself. It still has the same parameters attached to it, alignments and everything, so it still works the same as these other ones, except it is outside of that array parameter. I basically put an equidistant parameter on it so that it always stays directly in the middle, because this will be what shows up when my single muntin option is selected. So then what I'm going to do is basically I'm going to put a visibility parameter on my array so that when I go to a single muntin, the array that will always be at least 2 does not show up. So what I did was I came into here and I hit edit group, I grabbed my muntin, and under visible, I grab this this parameter icon, and I have two visibility parameters that I've created. I created an array parameter, and then I create a single vertical parameter, because I don't want this single vertical that's a standalone to show up when I have two or more, and I don't want my array to show up when I have only one. So I have these two visibility parameters. The single vertical is applied to my standalone. The visibility array is applied to my array components. So once that is applied, I need to tell it when the array is taking precedent and when the single vertical is taking precedent. So what I did was I came in here and I created a couple of things, and this gets a little complicated, but hopefully you're able to kind of follow it if you go through this a couple times. So what I did was I created a general parameter just called vertical muntin number. I came down here and said new parameter, and I left it as common, and then I came in here and said it's an integer. I don't want a number because a number could be a decimal. An integer works the same way as the array parameter does, where I can just click the little up and down arrows and it goes from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 kind of thing. So I said, okay, I want an integer, and then I place this under general. You can place it pretty much wherever you want, depending on where you want this to kind of show up within your properties when you move this into the model. Then I said I wanted it to be an instance because I want to be able to control that for each window, not all of the windows of that specific type. So I said instance, and I said I named this, looks like I named this vertical muntin number. And I said okay. So that's basically what this is right here, is this vertical muntin number, and I can crank this up and down as I see fit to determine how many vertical muntins I want. Then I need this to override my array option. So if you'll see here, so I have my vertical muntin number right here, and then I have my actual array is right down here. So it is grayed out right now because it's being overridden by a formula here. So what I did was I put a formula in for my vertical muntin that says if, and this works the same way Excel does. So I used an if statement that says if vertical muntin number, so it's referring to this that I just created. So if this is less than 2, then my array stays at 2, because it'll give me an error if it goes less than that. So if this shows up as 1, then this stays as 2. Otherwise, use whatever number is here. So basically what that just told it is if this is 1, then this stays at 2 so I don't get an error. Otherwise, use whatever number I have here, which could be 2 verticals, 3 verticals, whatever. That just prevents this from giving me an error. And then if I come down here to my visibility parameters, I set this up as 2 different equations. So I used a not basically formula here, which basically says if visibility of single vertical, which is my one vertical muntin, that is like if I only want one, if that is checked on, then this is checked off, is basically what that tells it. So if visibility single vertical is not selected, then yes, then this is checked. And then under my visibility single vertical, I said if the vertical muntin number is less than 2, so if my parameter says it's 1, then this is checked on. So basically by associating these two, I've turned them on and off. So as soon as I move this to 2 and lock that in, now that check mark just moved from single to the array. So now my everything should work pretty harmoniously here. And when I take this into my project, I can go to a single vertical button and it'll automatically check the visibility parameters on and off as I need them to get those verticals to work correctly. So that's basically the way that I've gotten around the whole problem of having an error message every time you want to go to a single vertical button within the array. It's a little complicated, but once you kind of figure out all the formulas and stuff, it's not too bad. So I just wanted to come back in and show you guys how exactly I resolved that issue.